On official maps, it was identified simply as the Epidemic Prevention and Water Purification Department, a mundane title for a facility that promised public health and clean water. But behind these high walls, hidden within the frozen plains of Manchuria, lay a reality that defies human comprehension. This was not a place of healing. It was a factory of death, a place where the Hippocratic Oath was inverted, and the goal was not to save lives, but to determine exactly how much the human body could endure before it broke. Join me as we uncover the darkest secret of World War II, story so harrowing it was buried for decades. Welcome to the nightmare of Unit 731. Today, we are embarking on a journey into one of the most chilling chapters of human history, a hidden gem of darkness that has long been overshadowed by the atrocities committed in the European theater. When we think of the horrors of the Second World War, our minds often turn to the Holocaust and the concentration camps of Nazi Germany. But in the East, amidst the biting cold of occupied China, a different kind of hell was being constructed. A place where science was weaponized in ways that still haunt the medical community today. In this video, you'll explore the rise and fall of Unit 731. We aren't just looking at the statistics of war. We are examining a catastrophic collapse of morality. We will delve into the mind of General Shiro Ishii, a man whose charisma was matched only by his cruelty. We will witness how thousands of innocent people were stripped of their humanity, reduced to the status of Maruta or logs to be consumed in the fires of research, much like the tragedy of Pompeii, where a vibrant tapestry of life was extinguished in an instant. The victims of Unit 731 were caught in a disaster only. This one was entirely man-made. But perhaps the most disturbing aspect of this narrative isn't just the experiments themselves. It is the silence that followed. We will uncover the pact with the devil, made in the aftermath of the war's secret deal where justice was traded for data, and the architects of this nightmare were allowed to walk free. It is a haunting reminder that history is written by the victors, and sometimes the truth is the first casualty. If you are ready to face the uncomfortable reality of the past, join me as we open the files on Unit 731. The architect of the nightmare, Shiro Ishii. Every great tragedy in history usually has a singular driving force behind it, a visionary whose moral compass has been shattered. For Unit 731, that architect was General Shiro Ishii. Born in 1892, Ishii was far from an ordinary soldier. He was a prodigy, a graduate of the prestigious Kyoto Imperial University, known among his peers as a brilliant microbiologist and surgeon. Yet those who knew him also described him as eccentric, pushy, and undeniably arrogant. While most doctors viewed medicine as a means to heal, Ishii viewed the human body as a battlefield. In the late 1920s, he embarked on a 2-year tour of the West to study the effects of biological warfare. He paid particularly close attention to the Geneva Protocol of 1925, which had banned the use of chemical and biological weapons. Most of the world saw the Geneva Protocol as a necessary humanitarian guardrail. Ishii, however, saw it through a twisted lens. His logic was chillingly pragmatic. If the major world powers felt the need to ban these weapons, it must be because they were incredibly effective. To him, the ban wasn't a warning. It was an advertisement. It was a confirmation that biological warfare was the future of military dominance. Upon his return to Japan, Ishii began lobbying the military elite. His argument was seductive to a nation with imperial ambitions but limited natural resources. He argued that Japan, an island nation, could not compete with the industrial might of the West in a conventional war. But bacteria was a weapon that was cheap to produce, easy to conceal, and devastatingly lethal. He pitched science as the ultimate form of patriotism. With the invasion of Manchuria in 1931, Ishii found his canvas. The occupied territory offered him something he could never have in Japan: vast space, total secrecy, and an endless supply of subjects that the government viewed as expendable. He was given the green light to build his kingdom. What he constructed was a scientific paradise for his researchers. He recruited the brightest young minds from Japan's top universities, offering them state-of-the-art equipment and a freedom that didn't exist elsewhere. In this isolated world, there were no ethical review boards, no budget caps, and no moral boundaries. It was a unique perspective on research, liberated from conscience. Unfortunately, this paradise for the scientists was designed to be a living hell for everyone else. The fortress of Pingfang, 1936. Construction began on a massive complex in the Pingfang district, just outside the city of Harbin. To the locals, it was a mysterious, forbidden zone. The official cover story was that it was a lumber mill, and in a macabre twist of irony that reveals the depths of their dehumanization, the prisoners sent there were referred to in all communications as Maruta logs. This term, logs, was more than just a code word for secrecy. It was a psychological tool. It allowed the doctors and guards to dissociate from their actions. They weren't operating on fathers, daughters, or soldiers. They were simply processing raw materials. The scale of the facility was staggering. Covering nearly 6 square kilometers, Unit 731 was a self-contained city. It housed an airfield, a railway line, power plants, and administrative buildings. But it also had amenities for the Staffer Shinto shrine, a cinema, and schools for their children. It was a surreal juxtaposition, a vibrant tapestry of normal family life existing mere yards away from chambers of unspeakable torture. At the heart of this complex lay the row block, the prison and experimentation center. These buildings were constructed with concrete walls so thick that no scream could ever penetrate to the outside world. It was a fortress of silence. The capabilities of Unit 731 were terrifying. Ishii and his team boasted the capacity to produce hundreds of pounds of plague bacteria every single month. To put that into perspective, that is enough biological agent to kill the population of the Earth several times over. The security was absolute. The airspace above the facility was restricted, and anyone who ventured too close to the perimeter was shot on sight. Within these walls, isolated from the rest of humanity, the scientists of Unit 731 began to push the boundaries of medical ethics until they shattered completely. The descent into madness, the experiments now, we must turn our attention to the experiments themselves. This is the most difficult part of our journey, but it is a necessary testament to the suffering of the victims. Ishii wanted data that was pure. He believed that animal testing was insufficient. To understand the true mechanics of death, one needed human subjects. One of the primary areas of research was driven by the climate itself. Manchuria is known for its brutal winters, where temperatures can drop to 40 degrees below zero. The Japanese army needed to know how to treat frostbite. To study this, prisoners were marched out into the freezing cold. Their arms and legs were doused in water and left exposed to the elements until they were frozen solid. We have testimony from former guards stating that they would strike the frozen limbs with clubs to check if they were ready. The sound was described as resembling a board of hard wood. Once frozen, the subjects were dragged back inside, where scientists experimented with various thawing methods, pouring boiling water over the limbs, holding them over open fires, or leaving them to thaw naturally. The agony was excruciating, often resulting in gangrene and amputation. The goal was to find a cure, but the method was torture. Perhaps the most insidious practice was vivisection, the dissection of a living human body. Ishii and his top surgeons believed that anesthesia could alter the body's natural responses and taint the data. Therefore, many victims were strapped to operating tables and cut open while fully conscious. Researchers would infect prisoners with plague, cholera, or anthrax, and then open them up at various stages of the disease to observe the damage to internal organs in real time. Men, women, children, and even infants born in captivity were subjected to this. It was a hauntingly brutal perversion of curiosity. They treated the human body not as a vessel of life, but as a biological machine to be taken apart. But the horror was not confined to the laboratory. Unit 731 viewed the entirety of China as a field test. They developed Ujibomb ceramic casings filled with plague-infected fleas. These were dropped over cities like Ningbo and Changde. In other instances, they poisoned wells with cholera or distributed typhoid-laced bread to starving villagers. The resulting outbreaks killed an estimated hundreds of thousands of civilians. These were not just experiments. They were the first major acts of modern biological warfare. What makes this even more chilling is the cold, academic way it was recorded. In the scientific papers published by these doctors after the war, they referred to their subjects as Manchurian monkeys. They published their findings in prestigious medical journals, building careers on data harvested from torture. The scientific community accepted the data, often turning a blind eye to its origins. The psychology of dehumanization. How does a human being reach a point where they can commit such atrocities? How does a doctor sworn to do no harm become an executioner? To understand Unit 731, we must look at the psychology of dehumanization. The term Maruta was the key. By stripping the victims of their names and reducing them to inanimate objects, the perpetrators created a moral buffer. The staff at Unit 731 lived a life of cognitive dissonance. They would spend their days inflicting unimaginable pain, and their evenings reading stories to their children or practicing calligraphy. They rationalized their actions through the lens of extreme nationalism and scientific necessity. In interviews conducted decades later, an elderly former employee of the unit offered a glimpse into this mindset. He stated they were already spies condemned to death. We just made their deaths serve a higher purpose for science. This is a classic deflection, blaming the victim to absolve the perpetrator. The reality, of course, was that the vast majority of victims were not spies. They were farmers, captured soldiers, and civilians who were simply in the wrong place at the wrong time, much like the carbonized remains found at Herculaneum, which tell the specific stories of individuals frozen in their final moments. Each log at Pingfang had a life, a family, and a history. But within the walls of Unit 731, that history was erased, replaced by a number and a clipboard of data. A pact with the devil. By August 1945, the end was drawing near. The Soviet Union invaded Manchuria, and the atomic bombs fell on Japan. Shiro Ishii saw the writing on the wall. His final orders to the facility were absolute: destroy everything. The complex was dynamited. The remaining Maruta were gassed or shot, and their bodies were burned to ash. Ishii ordered his subordinates to take the secret to their graves. But the most infuriating chapter of this story was yet to be written. When the United States occupied Japan, American intelligence became aware of the biological research. The Cold War was beginning to freeze over, and the US was terrified that the Soviets might gain an advantage in biological warfare. General Douglas MacArthur and American investigators made a calculated decision. They approached Shiro Ishii with a proposition that remains a stain on the legacy of the Allied victory. The deal was simple: hand over the data, the thousands of slides, the research on Frostbite, the biological weapon, formulas, and, in exchange, you will receive full immunity, while Nazi doctors were being prosecuted at Nuremberg for similar crimes. The architects of Unit 731 were given a free pass. The Tokyo War Crimes Tribunal did not prosecute a single member of the unit. The United States government, in a quest for strategic advantage, effectively shielded these monsters from justice. This was Operation Paperclip's darker, quieter sibling. The doctors of Unit 731 didn't just survive, they thrived. They went on to become deans of prestigious medical schools, heads of major pharmaceutical companies, and officials in the Japanese Ministry of Health. Shiro Ishii lived as a free man until 1959, dying of throat cancer in his home, never having spent a day in a prison cell. Justice was sacrificed on the altar of national security. Today, on the site of the Pingfang complex, a museum stands as a haunting reminder of what took place. The walls are inscribed with the words "inhuman atrocity," serving as a testament to the thousands of lives extinguished in the name of science. Unit 731 is not just a shame for Japan or a tragedy for China. It is a universal warning of what happens when science is divorced from ethics. Thank you for joining me as we explored this hidden chapter of history. It is never easy to confront such darkness, but acknowledging these events is the only way to ensure they remain in the past. Just as we study the ruins of ancient civilizations to understand their lives, we must study these scars of modern history to understand our own responsibilities. If this video gave you a new perspective on the hidden costs of the war, please consider liking the video and subscribing to the channel for more deep dives into history's most fascinating and terrifying moments. Here is a question I want to leave you with. Do you believe that scientific data obtained through unethical means should ever be used, or should it be destroyed along with its creators? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Until next time, keep exploring the past.
Chronoscripts is your gateway to the forgotten, mysterious, and hidden corners of history.